Hello, welcome to John's Jam Sessions, the music podcast. You may have noticed that we are no longer the Who Asked for This podcast. Decided to do a few change ups on the show. We're going to focus more on music, and today I am all alone. Yep, this is the first solo episode that I'm going to do. I don't plan on doing loads of these. I do want to continue to keep bringing in guests. It is a lot easier talking to someone rather than kind of talking to yourself, really. But we're going to give it a go and see how it goes. I think I've got a pretty interesting topic album to talk about today. Today I'm going to be talking about the Guns N' Roses album, Chinese Democracy, released on the 23rd of November 2008, which is coming up to about 16 years, which is horrible to think about, really. So obviously a brief background, because I don't want this to be like a history lesson or anything like that. There's plenty of places you can go and look up on Guns N' Roses and a lot of the background behind this album, which I will go into a bit, but not too much. Guns N' Roses formed in the 1980s in America. Very iconic band, very iconic band members, such as Axl Rose, lead singer, Slash on the guitar. Slash is, a household name. Everyone knows who Slash is. Duff on the bass, very underrated bassist. We could get into that on another episode one day. And kind of got your lesser known members, like you've got Izzy, who was, he had a big part in the songwriting. He's kind of like undercast a bit. Obviously, Guns N' Roses now, in their modern state, are a kind of semi-reformed band. Obviously Slash and Duff are back, but original members who were in it on the original Appetite for Destruction run aren't. Guns N' Roses burned bright and they burnt fast. They hit the scene with Appetite for Destruction in the late 80s, and it was just like an absolutely monumental kind of change the world of music kind of album. It was massive. Most people argue that is their best work, and it was never topped. I think there is obviously a point to be made there. It is a very good album. I think we will get into it a bit with their other albums. So after that, they released two double albums at the same time, Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. That was in about 91, I believe. And then they released a cover album a couple of years after that. Obviously, there was the G&R Lies double EP that came out in between. And then things started to fall apart for the band. There was egos involved, and obviously a lot of tension and a lot of burnout from just how hard they've been going. Axl Rose obviously wanted to steer the ship in a certain direction, which the other band members weren't particularly keen on. And this eventually led to, I don't think they all broke up at the same time or left at the same time, but like one after the other, each member of the band started leaving until it was only Axl Rose left. Axl wanted to keep hold of the band and keep it going under the name Guns N' Roses, and he started hiring in people left, right and centre and started getting back to work on making new music. This was kind of around the mid-90s, I believe. This went on for a bit and then kind of fell apart, and Axl kind of vanished for a few years and went into the, he became like a bit of a mythical creature for the period of time, until around the back end of the 90s into the 2000s he popped up again, and then hype started building up for this album that had been being worked on and off over the years, called Chinese Democracy. The band, Axl, under the name Guns N' Roses, and various other musicians that were constantly hopping in and out, were touring and playing songs off this album, and a lot of hype was building up for this album, but there was always like delays. It kind of became this big joke in kind of like the music world of this Chinese Democracy, this like really grand, big, ambitious project that was just never going to see the light of day. There was constantly like release dates announced, and then they didn't happen. Songs were just getting leaked all over the internet and stuff like that. And then eventually it just really felt really kind of bizarre. Obviously, I'm going to kind of get into the more personal side around the release of this album and kind of my experience with it. At some point in about 2008, the album's announced, and I remember at the time kind of thinking to myself, here we go again. Here we go. The album that's never going to come out is supposedly coming out. But this time it seemed legit. We had the artwork revealed. We got the release of Chinese Democracy, the title track, as a single. So it did all seem like it was going ahead. But I remember at the time thinking, for an album that was so like highly anticipated and kind of built up and had this whole like mythology around it and this whole like legend status around it, it just felt really weird that this album was just coming out of nowhere, and it was just kind of like, right, here's the album, here you go, it's out. And there was other like weird stuff going on at the time. Like obviously we're talking like 2008 internet, so there was like no way of like getting information off it like there is today. But it was still somewhat not as accessible as it is now. Would be checking in on like kind of like music news sites and stuff like that. And you were getting these reports that, Chinese Democracy's coming out, but it's a Walmart exclusive. I'm from the UK. So I was like, right, well, we don't have a Walmart, so how am I going to get my hands on this album? Going to be accessible to get your hands on. By this time, iTunes, MP3s, and digital streaming was a thing. I'm a bit old school. I'm very into my physical media. I needed the CD of this, so like my memory's a bit phasey, kind of all around the release. But I remember the day it came out. I was in college. I fucking hated going to college, so I basically bunked off the rest of the afternoon, went into the nearest town, went into like a Sainsbury's, which is like just basically like a supermarket, and it was there, picked it up, and I was like, it was like, you're holding Chinese Democracy. It kind of felt a bit surreal that this was finally happening, but at the same time, it felt super anticlimactic. It felt really like, is this it after like all these years? Now, it's kind of funny looking back on it, because Chinese Democracy was under production for about 8 years, just under a decade of true, actual, work in the studio and stuff like that. Looking back on that now, that is nothing compared to some of the waits we've had to wait between releases of albums. For example, I'm still waiting on the new Cure album, which was, I think, first kind of like announced to be in the works back in 2018. So, we've been waiting, what? Like 8 years now, closely enough, yeah. They've been forever teasing it. It's in its like final stages of completion. There's just no news of it whatsoever. I think it was kind of more around like Axl Rose and what people kind of thought about Axl Rose around that time. Had kind of lost a bit of favour amongst like the public and the music world. He was just kind of known for being this egotistical arsehole. People would kind of dismiss his like the modern at the time, the current version of Guns N' Roses as just nothing more than a tribute band or an Axl Rose solo project. And obviously there was so much around this album, what's it going to sound like? What is Guns N' Roses without Slash or Duff or even Matt or Izzy or anyone like that? There was a lot of mystery around this album, basically. So it came out, and well, we're going to get into a review of it. I'm just going to talk a bit kind of about how I felt about the album at the time, which was very, very fondly, surprisingly enough. It kind of feels a bit weird getting like super personal just on like, like this podcast, but I haven't really ever really been very open about this. But like kind of 2008, around the time that the album came out, I was in like a very low period of my life. I felt very down and depressed. I kind of felt like life had kind of gone a bit to shit for me around that stage. A few years prior, I kind of felt like I was kind of like in my prime. I was a young teen. It was kind of like that. Life was great, no responsibilities, anything like that. Good, close group of friends, relationships and all that. And then that kind of just went overnight almost. I kind of felt like I lost everything. I kind of separated a bit from my friends. I became a bit recluse. I became like very like, kind of self-conscious, and I think my health took a bad turn and stuff like that. I was in a pretty dark space at the time, really. I felt very isolated and alone. And the reason I'm telling you this is because that's kind of the feeling I get. Obviously, the thing is with music is the good thing about it is you can interpret many things from it, and you can kind of put your own kind of story behind songs. A song to someone could mean something completely different to someone else. So this kind of album, this whole concept of a whole, of kind of this Axl being kind of abandoned by his band members, but he's still eager to carry on the name of this band that he's created and helped make into what it was. And there is like a feeling of loneliness and isolation with the album. I think if you come into it with that approach, it really does kind of open up a more interesting side to the album. I remember like listening to a lot of the songs, which I'll get into when we do the track by track, and I really did latch on to a lot of the kind of feelings. I feel like there's kind of like a bitterness. There's that feeling of kind of abandonment and kind of trying to tackle the world on your own. I really latched onto it, mate. I listened to it a lot, and I mean a lot. Like I'd have it on daily, and I think backlash of the album at the time and a lot of the negative reviews it was getting, a lot of the negative feedback, that I think the problem with the album is most people just weren't bothered to give it a go, because they were like, that's not Guns N' Roses, that's Axl Rose. I don't like Axl Rose. He's an asshole. I'm not listening to it. So I feel like, I was really trying to like fight the corner and make a defense for this album and try and get people on board, but no one was really having it. Do have some sponsors and comments that I've received off Reddit and various other places, and I was quite surprised by some of the reactions and reviews and thoughts of this album. So we will get into them later, but I think that's enough waffling on for now. All you need to know is back in 2008, I loved this album. I probably would have rated it, if you went back to 2008 and asked me, I would have rated it at like something like a 9 out of 10, which, to be honest, I think is a bit ridiculous. So we're going to get into a track by track review, and we are going to start with the title track, Chinese Democracy. The album kind of starts with this kind of like eerie intro. You kind of get these these sounds like these chatters, and it has kind of got that kind of Chinese, Asian-y, kind of Oriental-y kind of feel to it. You can kind of imagine yourself on like a busy street in like China or something like that. The guitar's like plucking and building up. That does help build up a lot of tension, but the song itself really only kind of does like an okay job at opening the record. I feel like it lacks like a real kick. An album with this much kind of like surrounding it needed at the time. Like I don't really think it's like, oh my god, this is it. We are in Chinese Democracy. Let's go. This album has started. I just don't think it really kind of is hype enough or anything like that. Another really big thing I noticed, and kind of is a thing throughout the whole album that I'm going to keep bringing up, is like kind of like the production and the mixing. This is very clean and very polished. Obviously, with so many years and so much money behind it, obviously would be. But I don't think that's a good thing, to be honest, because with Guns N' Roses and their earlier works, I always think one of the great things about their sound was kind of like how raw it felt. This feels very like sterile, I say, very, very clean. All in all, I think a song like Chinese Democracy could have done with a bit more of like a rawness to it. So I'm going to rate Chinese Democracy a 6 out of 10. I'm going to do out of 10 ratings for all the tracks on this album. And then we get into, I've got a feeling I'm going to say this wrong. I don't know why. I just always look at it and like my brain kind of fuzzes up. Shackler's Revenge. That's what I'm going to call it. If you don't like it, please feel free to kick off. So there's certainly a lot going on in this song. The intro riff does spark a bit of interest, but at the same time, it feels very kind of like, I feel like it's something that could put you off immediately, because it's very like, not bit sound like fucking Beavis. This track does feel a bit more of like a modernized Illusion track. Like I kind of think of like the song Garden of Eden when I think of this track that was on Use Your Illusions. It's very, fast, very, breakneck, very punchy. The chorus is quite catchy, and there's a few hooks in this track. I do enjoy the subtle Nine Inch Nails influences. I think at the time when kind of Nine Inch Nails really broke out, Axl Rose was like really taken aback by that band and very influenced by them. And on the many on the revolving door of musicians that went in and out during the years. I think he did have a few Nine Inch Nails artists contribute on this album. I just wish the track popped more, and it just wasn't as. So I think that is another 6 out of 10 on that one. But now we get into better, and to be honest, I can't put my bias behind me here. Better fucking slaps, and it goes hard. I've always loved this track. I love the catchy vocal melodies. I think the guitar on this is a solid track. I've been enjoying this track since about first time I heard it is when I saw them live in about 2006. If I had one complaint, it'd be the slightly weak kind of pre-chorus and chorus, but I think the verse is the real hook on this track. You know, some that's the case. I think there's an amazing guitar solo in the song too. I really do think Better is one of my favourite Guns N' Roses tracks. Although there is a lot going on in this song, a stripped down version would have made it a 10 out of 10, but I'm just going to dip it slightly and make it a 9 out of 10. So we're going to, after that, Street of Dreams. We slow down a bit with more of a ballad. I think this is a great back-to-back, by the way, Better than Street of Dreams. This really is a great ballad. The album does shine with its more ballad songs. I'm a big fan of Axl Rose's vocals and lyrics on this song. I haven't got really too much to say about it. I think it's a solid 8 out of 10. And then we get into If the World. I don't hate this song. I'll give it that. But I really don't like it. It's a bit of a fucking porn jam, to be honest. It sounds like fucking 70s porno music. The dragged out vocals, kind of like the way Axl delivers them from line to line, I'm not really a fan of. I do like drumming on this track. It is like a nice little drum beat on this. It's not terrible, but it overstays its welcome. It's a bit filler, and sadly, it's kind of a drop off from kind of what we've just had previously. I'm going to rate this one a 5 out of 10. And then we get into There Was a Time. Again, I do have to give praise to Axl's vocals and melodies. The chorus is crap, though. One thing about this album is the choruses are a bit weak, to be honest. I don't think they're like Axl Rose's strong points, especially in this album. I can see how people can find this album very messy, as some of the transitions from the song parts don't blend so well. So I think sometimes the verse and the chorus, things kind of just move, geared a bit too sharply, and it kind of feels like there's been a bit of cut and paste on these songs, and like there's kind of like an element of like a Frankenstein to them. Obviously, with so many years of work, so many people involved, this was just inevitable and bound to happen with an album like this. So I think that is a problem. What does pick this song back up is the final third for me. I think it really goes really hard. I love the guitar solo. I was going to give this a 6 out of 10, but kind of for that last kind of end bit of the song, I'm going to push it to a 7 out of 10. You're welcome, Axl. So then we get into the Catcher in the Rye cute intro. Again, the verse is a nice catchy hook. I like the feeling of kind of a bit of feeling of melancholy on this track. Again, I'm not massive on some of the transitions from verse to chorus, but the chorus is strong on this one. The piano stands out nicely on this, and I do like the breakdown. I think this song is pretty pleasant. However, I feel the mix gets a bit muddy at the outro. I don't know if this was just an issue of I was listening to this on vinyl. I don't know if this was an issue of my record, but everything started to get like a bit fuzzy and a bit muddy at the end. I don't know if that was a problem with the mix or if it was just, I don't know, maybe my record needed cleaning or something like that. But it did feel a bit odd. So I'll give that song a 7 out of 10, which looking back on it now, feels a little generous considering what I had to say about it. But don't worry, because we've got scraped. I'm assuming it's scraped. Although impressive, I'm not a fan of this vocal intro. I'm not going to try and impersonate it here, but it's kind of like one of them, like if it came on in public or in the car or something, I'd probably immediately skip it. I don't know if anyone else ever feels like that with songs sometimes where you kind of get this second-hand embarrassment and a bit of cringe off it. I do think it is a bit cringe. Going back to like kind of like the copy-paste thing that I said, I really kind of noticed that in this song, like some of the vocal parts cut off. too soon. So, like, if he's sustaining a note or not quite finished the end of a word yet, it feels like kind of like cuts. Again, with kind of like an album like this, it's obviously a case of too many cooks in the kitchen, isn't it? And I think that really does kind of show on this album. There's a lot of kind of like guitar wankery here, which I like to call it. I'm not a fan of Buckethead's contributions on this album, really. I think they do work sometimes, but a lot of the times they're just kind of like thrown in as like a little kind of like noodle or to make a bit of noise. I think this is the weakest track on the album so far. I'm going to have to give it a 4 out of 10. So then we get into Raid. I can't remember the full name. I've only wrote Raid on my notes here. Sorry. Axl's Nine Inch Nails influences showing again on this intro. Another similar vocal start, similar to the last track. However, and I think this is the first time I can really say this on this album, the chorus is fucking great. I do really like the chorus. The verses are a bit weak, but it does call back a bit back to kind of like the music from the Use Your Illusions albums a bit, I think. I think all in all, I don't think this track has much to say for itself because, well, besides its catchy chorus, Buckethead solos, again, really don't do much for me. So it's a 5 out of 10. Scraped was 4 out of 10, by the way. Don't think I said that. Then we get into Sorry. So we're kind of quite deep in the album now, heading towards the back end. So we've had a bit of a middle slump so far on this album. Sorry was a song I really latched onto a lot when I was younger, especially kind of like the lyrics and kind of like the moodiness of the song. Although it's not the best song on the album, I really resonate with the emotions on this track. The build up to the chorus and the pre-chorus are really nice. The solo's great. It has a great bluesy kind of number to it. I'm a bigger fan of this style of playing than kind of like the kind of stuff Buckethead throws in. And I've rated that a 7 out of 10. I think my favourite line from Sorry, it's better to live with the lies about me than to live with the truth about you. I think that really stands out as quite a strong, hard-hitting lyric, that. Then we get into the IRS. This track is a bit messy. Nothing really stands out to me. I always find the lyrics, I'm going to call the president, I'm going to call the IRA. The IRA, fucking hell, you don't want to call them, fucking hell. Don't call the IRA. I'm gonna call the FBI. I really don't like this song. I always find these lyrics a bit cringe and a bit weird. I just don't really think it's got much to really say for itself. It's just pure filler, in my opinion. 5 out of 10. And then we get into Madagascar. I'm quite conflicted about this track because I feel like it's shot for the moon. I feel like it was intended to be one of the epics, like Estranged, kind of something attempted like that, but it really kind of falls flat a bit. However, that's not to say that I hate it. I feel like it is too kind of programmed and not organic enough. There are parts I enjoy, like the more kind of like emotional tone. The breakdown with the Martin Luther King Jr. and the samples that they sampled off Civil War is a cool bit, I will admit. All in all, I think this is a bit of a dud, and like kind of like having like this kind of clump of kind of mid tracks on this kind of part of the album really drags it down a lot, because I'm going to have to rate Madagascar a 5 out of 10. We pick up now on the way towards the end, so we get into This I Love. This I Love is no November Rain, but this is a great track. The piano does a fantastic job carrying the track from start to end. The guitar solo, it really stands out. The lyrics are basic and they do repeat a bit, which is a shame, but it's not needed. It's not really a song that's meant to be telling a big, complex story. I will rate that a more generous 7 out of 10. I would definitely recommend listening to that one. And then we get into the album's closer, Prostitute. I've got to be honest, similar to Better. I can't prevent my bias from getting in the way. Better, Sorry, This I Love, and this track were the songs I really resonated a lot with, like during that kind of like that dark period of my life. That they were always on repeat. I remember always like putting this song on in bed at like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, not being able to sleep, just kind of looping this song and kind of like resonating with the lyrics and stuff like that. I can't prevent my bias getting in the way there, as I said. As soon as the song started, when I was doing my listen last night, kind of a lot of them feelings kind of did just kind of like rush back, like kind of like a time capsule kind of thing. I do think the lyrics are really kind of quite sad, and I do feel that. I really do feel like a kind of connection to the song. But I do have to try and review it, so I have to nitpick. The chorus, again, isn't anything to write home about. I think that's a problem with this album as a whole, is that kind of and what people expect, quotation marks, from a Guns N' Roses album. You look back to Welcome to the Jungle, you look back to Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City. You want these anthemic, big, booming choruses. This album really doesn't deliver on that. It really doesn't deliver on the anthems and stuff like that. In my opinion, this is an album you need to listen to as an album. I think you do have albums like that. Anyway, get back and finish this track review off. Chorus, again, as I said, it isn't strong. The album has shown that throughout. The Buckethead parts aren't great. But at the end of the day, I'm only human, and I can't disconnect my feelings from this song. So I'm gonna have to give it an 8 out of 10. So you look at all the scores. I've got 6-6, 9-8-5, 7-7, 4-5, 7-5-5, 7-8. So as you can imagine, that is a real mixed bag. Like, it's mad to have an album where you've got four out of 10s, and then you've got 9 out of 10s. You don't really see that. I think the best way I could describe this album is like a roller coaster, where you have that slow kind of ride up to the top, and then it plummets down to the bottom and then brings you back up again at the end. But it doesn't really recapture the highs from kind of earlier on in this album. I think this album will always kind of take me back to a period of time that, although it was dark and filled with a bit of sadness, I feel like time does heal all wounds, and I kind of can look back with it with a bit of kind of nostalgia. In a way, I do give it a lot of credit for that kind of stuff. Looking at it in a more kind of modern lens with a critical eye, considering the history and just how much money and time and all the drama that went into this album, I do have to say it did fall flat. It shot for the moon, and it just, it just spiraled off and kind of crashed. I do think that's a shame. I do think with a bit of work, it could have been a lot better. Well, let me change that. I think with a lot less work, it could have been a lot better. So, my review of this album has to be, drum roll, 6 out of 10. I think that's fair. I think people may disagree, especially more Guns N' Roses fans. I think even people who don't like this album will disagree. So I don't think I'm going to be pleasing anyone here. But I think a 6 out of 10 is fair enough for this album. When I was playing this, my partner was listening as well. She's not really a music head. She's never listened to a Guns N' Roses album in her life. She gave it a 7 out of 10. So take from that what you want. So that was kind of like my review of the album. It's kind of one of them where it's like I said before, like too many cooks really do spoil something. So many people worked on this album. It was kind of stop and start for so long. So much trouble around it. Obviously, it was always cast under that shadow of how can this top the earlier work? How can Axl kind of prove that this album should exist and that this band should exist without Slash and the other members? Again, Axl's always kind of had a bit of a love-hate Marmite kind of reputation with people. I think the people that don't like Axl Rose really kind of like jumped on this and really just didn't want to give this album the time of day. I think the people who love Axl love this record and love it for what it's for. I think the comment you heard the most at the time, and you hear a lot today, is this shouldn't have been a Guns N' Roses album. Axl should have just gone solo. Like, his name and his kind of brand was so big enough at this point that he could have easily have just carried on as Axl Rose. I think if he released this album under his name Axl Rose, and you kind of take out any kind of relation to Slash or anything to do with the previous Guns N' Roses works before this, I do think it would have been looked at more positively. But as I say, having a recent listen, there are some kind of mid sloppy tracks on this album. I can't be too generous. I do have to be critical. I wanted to hear what other people thought of this album. I've been on Reddit on the Guns N' Roses sub, reached out for some reviews and thoughts and stuff like that. I'm going to read some out now, as well as some friends I asked as well. We've got JD McDuffel, who says, it's an album that takes multiple listens to fully appreciate it. It's not a bad album, but it's not nearly as good as Appetite for Destruction or Use Your Illusions. I would definitely agree with what he said there. I think multiple listens, I think sometimes some of them kind of harsh intros, like on Shackler's Revenge and stuff, you can kind of adapt to that. There's so much going on in these songs sometimes that you're obviously not going to pick them up on a first listen. I think a few listens will help with this album and experience. And my cat's here again. You all right, Eve? Don't go on me. Don't go on me bloody stuff, will you? You'll mess up the podcast. Hey, Girl Killer, bit worrying. 3138 said it's the bestest album of all times. Girl Killer, I don't agree with you there, mate. I'm sorry, I don't. I gave it a 6 out of 10. Don't think it's one of the greatest albums of all time. But, you know, thanks for telling me that. Available Analyst 551 says it's an awesome album. It's the best one since Appetite, and it doesn't get the respect it deserves simply because it doesn't have Slash and Duff on it. Okay, I think that eventually I will have to kind of get more into Guns N' Roses discography on this show. What he said there when it is the best one since Appetite, I don't think he's right, but there's a bit of a hot take. Use Your Illusions has a lot of fluff on it. It's got some filler, and them two albums have some bad tracks, like really shit tracks. The one that I think of comes to mind instantly is the last track on Use Your Illusions 2, My World. That is probably one of the greatest offences to music that's ever been committed. So I'll give it you there, mate. That argument could be made. It could be made. However, this album doesn't have Civil War on it. It doesn't have November Rain on it. It doesn't have You Could Be Mine on it. It doesn't have Coma. It doesn't have Estranged. It doesn't have like Right Next Door to Hell. I just can't agree that it's the best thing since Appetite. But I think a debate could be made there, at least. Saint of Fate said, this album grows on you, and you kind of have to pretend like the Appetite for Destruction, Use Your Illusion albums don't exist to appreciate it. Again, going back to kind of what I said, if this was an Axl Rose project, if Slash, Duff, all the other members were kind of taken out the picture and it wasn't compared to other Guns N' Roses work, I do think this album would have got a better positive response than it did, to be honest. So, yeah, I do think you've got a point there, Saint of Fate. Machine Head 3413 says, my wife and I were standing outside Best Buy. Oh, yeah, that was it. Was it a Best Buy exclusive or a Walmart exclusive on the release day just to get it? Brought it home and we were both blown away. It's Axl's best vocal performance on any album. It didn't need to grow on us. It was a 10 out of 10 from first listen. This I Love is a standout track for us all. For us, but all of them are really top notch. Machine Head, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. But I just, if someone said to me, name a 10 out of 10 album, I don't think I could name one. Even my favourite albums, the albums I absolutely love, like some of my favourite albums that I think are like absolutely like pieces of art. To give them a 10 out of 10, I'd like Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I could not give that a 10 out of 10 because it's got Any Colour You Like on it. I think that song's a bit crap. You know what I mean? I think every album always has at least something that can hold it back from like a 10 out of 10. That's just the way I review music and I look at music. You know, if it's 10 out of 10 for you, it's a 10 out of 10 for you. I'm not going to disagree. Down by the Ocean says, my personal favourite album by GNR. If you take away the stigma and bullshit surrounding the album, most of the songs are excellent and it really showcases Axl's talent as a musician and that he enlisted very talented people to help him out on the album. I do agree. Again, I do agree. You have to bear in mind, I did give this a 6 out of 10. Don't necessarily disagree with what some of these people are saying. I think a lot of the harsh criticisms and kind of the people who give this album bad reviews are very kind of biased towards a lot of the stigma and bullshit that surrounded it, the history, and just Axl Rose in general. As I say, he's a very Marmite character. You either love him or you hate him. So we've got Phantom JB93, who says it's a good album, but it's not a Guns N' Roses. Don't care what Axl called the band, it's not the same band, as there's only one original member contributing to it. It's no more of a Guns N' Roses album than any of Slash's solo stuff. Now, I think you've brought up a good point there. I do think you brought up a good point, and I haven't really quite got into it. I touched upon it a few times on this episode, but I haven't really got into it. Kind of, when does a band stop being a band? And you can look at it as like, if there's no original members left. And obviously, Axl Rose was an original member. So in my eyes, I still think it can count as being Guns N' Roses. Like, you look at The Cure, Robert Smith is the only consistent member throughout the entire history of the band, start to finish. But The Cure is still The Cure. A lot of similar cases with stuff like that, all kind of like, Black Sabbath went on for so many years, so many people came in and out. It does happen a lot in music and stuff like that. It's kind of looking back now and what Guns N' Roses are doing now, their kind of modern lineup, and how they're saying this is the reunion, this is Guns N' Roses, and people now see it as Guns N' Roses again, even though it is missing members who had a very strong pivotal role in the early days and making the original stuff. So, you could even make the argument now of, is Guns N' Roses now? I don't know. I think with Axl Rose doing it on his own, he's 100% should have gone solo and classed it as a solo album. I do agree there. I think calling it a Guns N' Roses album gave it a lot to live up to, and I think that really did not help it. Tall Communication 526 said, "This I Love is the most underrated song of all time." Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, if Guns N' Roses were to release a new best of album or an album like that, I do think that song would have a place on that. That it obviously has been slept on, like a lot of this album's been slept on. But yeah, okay, yeah, I'll agree. I'll agree. Okay. Kid Meatball said, "My first impression of the album was it sounded like Axl spent all the time it took to make working on his voice. It was like he found more range, more texture, more tones, more Axl in the decade or so it took to make the album. It sounded so brand new, but still so familiar. It feels like when I go home to see my parents, bones of the town are the same, but everything appears new. There is a shine on things where there wasn't there before." I think that's a really good observation. That I think that goes back to kind of what I said. Some of the tracks do kind of harken back a bit to earlier Guns N' Roses, but they do sound like more, when I say modern, we still are talking well over a decade ago now, but it does still have a more modern lens to it. There's a lot more kind of new sounds incorporated into it. So I think that's a good point. Yeah, I do agree with you there, Kid Meatball. Hard JH14 says, "Has a couple of good songs on it. Still haven't listened to Shackler's Revenge in its entirety. I think it's bad and I can't get through it. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm indifferent." I really do think that intro is either a seller or it's you know what I mean. It either gets you right into it and you're invested straight away, or you're immediately put off. I do think that with the intro, I do think there is a lot going on in the song, and that can also put people off on listening to it. Gymosaurus Rex, Axl's best vocal performance easily. Just treat it like an Axl album and not a GNR album. It makes perfect sense. Again, I've gone through it multiple times, but yeah, again, he should have called this a solo album. Something a lot of people have brought up as well that I haven't actually touched on is the vocal performance, and the vocal performances are top notch, to be fair. I can't diss them, do have to agree. But again, with so much work and time in the studio, you'd expect that, to be honest. Vince272005. I think a lot of people don't actually listen to it because they don't think it's real Guns. It had some really underrated songs with some of Axl's best vocals. IRS. Don't agree with you there, sorry, mate. There Was a Time, This I Love. I don't know if it helps with your podcast, but I've just turned 18. Well, congratulations on turning 18, Vince. Yeah, again, I think that's a reoccurring thing of that. This, at the end of the day, was a Guns N' Roses album. That decision was made. It wasn't the right decision, really, and I think it will always leave this album where it is in its current state, really. So Tom, who we had last week on the episode on the overrated, underrated, says, other than one or two tracks, in brackets, at best, like Shackler's Revenge, for example, this is a mishmash of bang average hard rock songs. Whilst not necessarily a bad album, it's absolutely nothing to rave about or get excited for, which is even more treacherous when you consider the over a decade-long hype and enigma of an album from a hardcore and casual fan base. Not an awful album, not a good album. It falls into the worst kind of album category imaginable, forgettable. For a band, if you call them that by this point, that is anything but forgettable. I think that is a good point, and I think kind of my review of the album The rating I gave it, 6 out of 10. For an album that had this much kind of like build up, it really did need to knock everyone out the park. It had to please everyone. It had so much to kind of, coming out the gate, it had so much against it. It really had to make a stand. Unfortunately, I don't think it did. I did ask Mike, who was on the Corn episode, and he said he listened to about 10 minutes of it and thought it was shite. So yeah, thanks everyone for giving me them thoughts and stuff. I hope you enjoy listening. Podcast comes out. I think I will wrap this episode up here. Thanks for listening. Please let me know your thoughts on the album, or if you have any albums to recommend to me to review. I'll be up for that. Please support me on social media, Facebook and Instagram mainly. Please give the podcast a 5-star review. Please follow on Spotify. Stuff like that really does help. If you're listening on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Thanks for listening and goodbye.